This is a story about how a man, grieving the loss of his wife, found himself in a battle against a petty tyrant and her HOA. It's a story about manipulation, power, and how one man with a background in finance used his skills not to get rich, but to restore peace and fairness to his community. If you've ever felt like your HOA rules were designed by someone who enjoys wielding minuscule power, or if you've ever fantasized about taking down a neighborhood dictator, this is for you. Grab a coffee, settle in, and let me tell you about the day I became the most hated man in Lakeside Estates. It all started with a $500 fine, not for throwing a wild party, not for a yard full of flamingos, but for something as simple, as innocent, as taking my grieving 14-year-old daughter, Solon, fishing in the community lake. We had moved to Lakeside Estates, searching for a fresh start after my wife, Rachel, lost her battle with cancer the previous year. Rachel, Solon, and I had found solace in fishing in the final months, a quiet ritual that brought us together. So, finding a home by the water felt like a way to honor her memory and help Solon and I heal. The realtor had painted a picture of idyllic suburban life, complete with a beautiful 6-acre lake as the centerpiece. She mentioned the HOA, of course, but brushed it off as just the standard stuff. Red flag number one I missed. The only hint of potential trouble was her slight pause before adding, "The HOA president, Karen Wellington, is very dedicated to maintaining property values." I, being a former venture capitalist, used to dealing with all manner of challenging personalities, figured I could handle a little bureaucratic overzealousness. How wrong I was. The true nature of Karen Wellington and the Lakeside Estates HOA hit me like a poorly maintained mailbox on a windy day. It was a bright Saturday morning in April. Solon and I had been at the lake for maybe an hour. Just us, the gentle lapping of the water and the quiet rhythm of casting lines. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen on Solon's face in weeks, as she carefully unhooked a bluegill she'd just caught. Then the voice, sharp, imperious, and laced with an unmistakable air of entitlement. "Excuse me, but what exactly do you think you're doing?" Approaching us was a woman who seemed to have stepped directly out of a Real Housewives of Suburbia casting call. Late 50s, clad in athleisure that screamed more expensive than your car, with a hairstyle that I swear is patented by "Can I speak to your manager?" herself. In her hand, a tablet, clutched like a weapon. Her expression, pure disdain, as if we were actively dumping toxic waste into the pristine waters. "Good morning," I said, forcing a pleasant tone, holding out my hand. "Just enjoying some fishing with my daughter. I'm Remi Thorncraftoft. We just moved into the Sycamore Drive house." She completely ignored my outstretched hand, her eyes fixed on her tablet. "Mr. Thorncraftoft," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness that couldn't mask the underlying venom. "Fishing is explicitly prohibited in our community lake. This is a direct violation of HOA regulations." She paused, then delivered her punchline with the gravitas of a queen, announcing an edict. "I'm Karen Wellington, HOA president. I'll have to issue a violation notice. The fine is $500. I felt Solon stiffen beside me. $500 for fishing? I tried to keep my voice calm. There must be a mistake. The realtor specifically mentioned fishing as an amenity. It was a selling point for us. Karen's thin smile didn't reach her cold eyes. The regulation was amended last month. All residents were notified via email. Ignorance of the rules doesn't exempt you from following them. She thrust the tablet at me, displaying a document titled Amendment to Recreational Use of Community Lake. The date was barely 4 weeks old. We never received any notification. I protested, genuinely baffled. I personally oversee all communications, Karen replied, with absolute irritating certainty. The email was sent to every household. Perhaps you should check your spam folder, Mr. Thorncraft-oft, though I can't be responsible for residents who don't bother to read official communications. My jaw tightened, but I held my tongue for Solin's sake. May I ask why fishing was suddenly banned? I gestured to the water, where I could clearly see bass and other fish swimming near the edges. This lake is clearly stocked. Karen gave a dismissive glance at our modest fishing gear. Environmental and safety concerns. The hooks can injure wildlife, and we've had complaints about the smell of fish and bait disturbing residents who are trying to enjoy the lake views from their homes. She looked pointedly at our tackle box. Not everyone wants to see this sort of activity while they're having their morning coffee on their patios. There was something in her tone, a subtle inflection, a barely perceptible curl of her lip as she surveyed our simple fishing equipment that made me look at Karen Wellington differently. This wasn't just about rules and regulations. This was about class, about who belonged and who didn't. We're being very careful, I said, my voice tight. Solon and I always practice catch and release, and we clean up completely. Karen's expression hardened. Mr. Thorncraft-oft, perhaps you don't understand how things work here at Lakeside Estates. We maintain certain standards in this community. This isn't a public fishing hole. The residents who've lived here for years expect a particular atmosphere. She glanced at Solin, then back at me, her implication crystal clear. New residents sometimes struggle to adapt to our community culture. People who are more accustomed to, shall we say, different types of neighborhoods. The anger I had been suppressing surged. I was about to unleash a response that would have made her manager hair stand on end. But then I heard a small sniffle beside me. Solin had tears welling in her eyes. This was supposed to be our place. A quiet corner of the world where we could begin to heal, where the crushing weight of grief could lift, even if just for an hour. And this woman, this petty tyrant, with her designer sneakers and inflated sense of importance, was ruining it with her thinly veiled condescension. We'll pack up, I said quietly, putting my arm around Solin's shoulders. Please email me the details of the fine and the full updated regulations. Karen's victorious smile returned. Excellent. I'm glad we understand each other. And do check your email more carefully in the future, Mr. Thorncraft-oft. We wouldn't want any further misunderstandings. She turned and walked away, her expensive athleisure swishing softly on the perfectly manicured grass. As we gathered our gear, Solin wiped her eyes. Dad, why was that lady so mean? We weren't hurting anything. I didn't have a good answer for her, at least not one that was appropriate for a 40-nothing-year-old. Some people just like rules more than they like people, sweetheart, I said finally. Let's go home and have some lunch. Later that day, after confirming that no email notification about the fishing ban existed in my inbox or spam folder, I started digging. My background in venture capital had taught me how to research, how to look beyond the surface, how to find the leverage points in any situation. What I found about the Lakeside Estates HOA and Karen Wellington in particular, was illuminating. 8 consecutive years as HOA president. Her day job, owner of a small but exclusive real estate company specializing in luxury community properties. A quick search revealed several social media posts of Karen hosting elaborate waterfront parties at the very same lake where she'd just fined me for fishing. These events, featuring alcohol, loud music, and numerous guests who clearly weren't residents, seemed remarkably exempt from the concerns about community atmosphere she had cited to me. Most revealing was a clause I found buried deep within the HOA documentation. The lake was actually listed as a common property amenity belonging to all residents. There was no legal distinction giving the HOA absolute control over its use. As I looked out my window toward the lake that evening, I saw Karen and what appeared to be a group of friends gathered at the lakeside gazebo, wine glasses in hand, laughing. They want to play the rules game, I murmured to myself. Fine. But first I needed to find out who actually owned this piece of water. My gut told me Karen's story about the lake being community property was, at best, a convenient half-truth. The following morning, as I was walking Solon to the school bus stop, I ran into an older gentleman walking his dog. He introduced himself as Merrick Henderson, a retired attorney living 3 doors down. When I mentioned my encounter with Karen Wellington, his friendly expression immediately darkened. "Ah, you've met our neighborhood dictator," he said with a grimace. "Let me guess, she quoted some obscure regulation and issued a fine." When I nodded, Merrick shook his head. "Karen's been running this place like her personal fiefdom for years. Most people just pay the fines and keep their heads down." He glanced around conspiratorially and lowered his voice. "If you're interested in some background information, why don't you come by for coffee sometime? I've got quite a collection of HOA horror stories." I took him up on his offer that same afternoon. Merrick's home was a testament to a life of legal scholarship, filled with law books, neatly stacked files, and framed photographs of what I assumed were former colleagues or clients. Over exceptionally good coffee, he shared what he knew about our community's peculiar power structure. "Here's what most residents don't realize," Merrick explained, pulling out a worn folder filled with documents. "The lake isn't actually owned by the HOA. It's owned by Meridian Development Corporation, the original developers of this community." He tapped a document with a highlighted date. "They leased recreational rights to the HOA for a 30-year term, which is why Karen and the board can set usage rules. But that lease expires in less than 2 months." This caught my attention immediately. "What happens then?" Merrick shrugged. "Technically, Meridian could renew the lease, sell the lake outright to the HOA, or find another buyer entirely. Most residents have no idea. They think the HOA owns everything in the community." He leaned forward, his eyes twinkling. "But here's where it gets interesting. I've heard through some contacts that Meridian is facing financial difficulties and might be looking to liquidate assets quickly. And our friend Karen knows this." Over the next hour, Merrick and I dug deeper into public records. My background in venture capital had equipped me with the skills to unearth financial information and identify patterns. And what we discovered was a disturbing pattern of manipulative behavior by Karen that went far beyond petty rule enforcement. Through various shell companies connected to her real estate business, She had been quietly acquiring properties throughout the neighborhood whenever residents were forced to sell, often after being hounded out by excessive HOA fines and violations. And now she's after a bigger game. Merrick concluded. From what I've gathered, she's been in private talks with Meridian to purchase the lake property herself. Not for the HOA, mind you, for her own real estate development company. Word is she plans to reduce lake access and build additional luxury homes on part of the shoreline. This explained the sudden fishing ban. It wasn't about environmental concerns at all. It was about gradually restricting lake usage to prepare for a complete change in ownership and a lucrative personal development project. Merrick introduced me to another key ally, Samuel Washington, a retired local bank owner, and one of the few residents who had openly opposed Karen's leadership for years. Samuel, an elegant African-American man in his 60s, had experienced Karen's subtle, yet undeniable discrimination firsthand. Samuel invited us to his study the following evening, a room filled with the quiet hum of technology and the comforting scent of old paper. There, he revealed a meticulously maintained database tracking HOA activities over the past decade. I started this as a simple record-keeping exercise, he explained, gesturing to his computer screen filled with spreadsheets and charts. But it quickly became apparent that there was a pattern to Karen's enforcement actions. It wasn't random. The data was undeniable and damning. Homeowners of color received violation notices at nearly 3 times the rate of their white neighbors. New residents were cited for infractions that long-standing homeowners routinely got away with. And most tellingly, properties that eventually sold at below-market rates due to compliance issues frequently ended up in the hands of shell companies with connections to Wellington Properties, Karen's real estate firm. Her real estate operation is clever, Samuel explained, pulling up property records and corporate filings. She never purchases directly. Instead, she uses a network of LLCs, Lakeside Investments, Wellington Holdings, Sierra Vista Properties, all ultimately tracing back to her, but obscured enough to avoid obvious connection. He showed me documentation of 6 different homes that had been purchased this way over the past 5 years, all following the same pattern. Excessive HOA violations, declining property values due to the ongoing harassment, desperate sales by the original homeowners, and eventual high-profit resales after cosmetic renovations. Merrick nodded grimly. The lake is her endgame. Meridian Development has been struggling since the recession. They overextended on commercial properties and have been quietly liquidating residential assets to cover debts. The lake was never meant to be permanent green space. The original development plan from 30 years ago actually included lakefront condominiums, but environmental regulations at the time prevented construction. Those regulations have since been relaxed, Samuel added, with the right connections at City Hall, which Karen certainly has. Permits could be issued for limited development. A half-dozen luxury lakefront homes could easily bring in $7 or $8 million in revenue. My professional interest was piqued. As a former venture capitalist, I was well-versed in recognizing distressed assets and opportunities where others saw only problems. Tell me more about Meridian's financial situation, I said. Over the next few days, Samuel connected me with former banking colleagues who provided discreet insights into Meridian's precarious position. The company had taken on substantial debt financing, a commercial development that had fallen through when anchor tenants pulled out during the pandemic. Their credit lines were maxed, and they were quietly selling off land holdings to avoid bankruptcy. The lake property, valued at roughly $300,000, was one of their few remaining unencumbered assets. Meanwhile, Merrick had been quietly arranging small, clandestine gatherings with other disgruntled residents. We met in rotating locations, sometimes at Samuel's home, sometimes in the private rooms of the local library, once even in the back room of a sympathetic resident's bakery shop, the smell of fresh bread masking our hushed conversations. The stories shared at these meetings revealed a disturbing pattern of targeted harassment. She cited me for excessive holiday decorations the day after I spoke against her at the town council meeting. James Morris, a retired teacher, told our small group, "I've had the same Christmas lights for 15 years, but suddenly they violated some obscure brightness ordinance. My foster children were banned from the community pool for being too loud," shared Maria Gonzalez, a healthcare worker whose 3 foster kids had been swimming happily until Karen's grandchildren arrived, and Karen decided they were a nuisance. When I asked which rule they had broken, she said it was her executive decision as HOA president. Diana Winters, a young widow who had moved to the community just before me, described how Karen had personally led an inspection committee through her backyard, claiming to check for mosquito breeding grounds. 2 days later, I received violation notices for 5 different issues, Diana recounted, her voice trembling. All things that my neighbors have but weren't cited for. When I pointed this out, Karen suggested that perhaps this community isn't the right fit for someone in your situation. Each story revealed Karen's tactical approach: isolate potential opposition, apply selective pressure through HOA mechanisms, fines, regulations, inspections, and either force compliance or drive people out. Those who stayed learned to keep their heads down. Those who fought back found themselves facing escalating harassment. Through these meetings, we identified potential allies throughout the community, residents who were tired of living under Karen's thumb. Samuel created a secure messaging group where residents could share experiences and information without fear of retaliation. We were building what amounted to an underground resistance within our own neighborhood. I also began researching Karen's personal financial situation. As an investor, I knew how to read between the lines of property records and business filings. What I discovered surprised me. Despite her carefully cultivated image of success, Wellington Properties was highly leveraged. Karen had taken out multiple lines of credit against her existing properties, likely to maintain her lavish lifestyle and fund her attempts to acquire new properties, including the lake. If the lake development plan fell through, she would be in serious financial trouble. She's not just doing this for profit, I explained to Merrick and Samuel during one of our strategy sessions. She's doing it out of necessity. Based on these financial records, she's overextended. The lake development isn't just an opportunity for her. It's financial survival. This information changed our calculus. We weren't just facing a neighborhood tyrant. We were dealing with someone fighting for their economic life. That made her more dangerous, but also potentially more vulnerable. At Samuel's suggestion, I also reached out to Robert Chen, a real estate broker who had insider knowledge about the lake property and the local market. We met at a discreet coffee shop 20 miles away to ensure privacy. Karen's been trying to put together financing to purchase the lake property for about $300,000. Robert confirmed, keeping his voice low despite the distance from our community. Meridian Development is in financial freefall and needs to close quickly. They've given her a 60-day exclusive negotiation period, but they're so desperate that they might accept a better offer if it came with immediate payment. Robert also revealed something even more interesting. Karen's real estate empire is mostly smoke and mirrors at this point, he explained. Wellington Properties looks impressive on paper, but she's leveraged to the hilt. She's been using her HOA connections and social network to maintain the appearance of success. But the truth is, she's about 3 bad months away from serious trouble. That's why she's so aggressive about this lake deal. She needs a big win to keep her creditors at bay. With this information, I began formulating a plan. As a venture capitalist, I had specialized in identifying distressed, but potentially valuable assets. Exactly what this lake property represented. I had the capital to make an immediate all-cash offer that would be extremely attractive to a cash-strapped developer like Meridian. The question was timing. When to make my move for maximum effectiveness. We need to wait until Karen has fully committed herself publicly to this project, Samuel advised. Let her announce the special assessment for lake improvements. Let her put her reputation on the line with the community and with her creditors. Then we pull the rug out from under her. Merrick agreed. The more resources and political capital she expends before we make our move, the more devastating the impact will be when we succeed, and the more likely the community will turn against her when they realize they've been manipulated. As our coalition grew and our plans developed, we maintained absolute secrecy about our ultimate strategy. To the outside world, and especially to Karen's network of informants within the community, we appeared to be simply a group of disgruntled residents documenting HOA overreach. Karen clearly knew we were meeting, as evidenced by the sudden increase in random rule enforcement against those associated with our group. But she couldn't know our true objective. With the information gathered from our various sources, Merrick's legal insights, Samuel's data and contacts, Robert's market knowledge, and my own financial investigations, we were ready to move to the next phase of our plan. Robert arranged a discreet meeting with Tom Branson, the Meridian executive handling the lake property sale. As I prepared for this crucial conversation, I knew we were approaching the point of no return in our battle against Karen Wellington. The stakes were high, not just for me and Solon, but for the entire community. It was time to see if our careful preparation would pay off. The meeting with Tom Branson took place at a private room in a downtown law office, far from curious eyes in our community. As Robert had mentioned, Meridian was indeed desperate to offload assets quickly. "Look, I'll be straight with you," Tom said after we'd covered the preliminaries. "We've given Wellington Properties a 60-day exclusive negotiation window, but there's a clause that allows us to entertain other offers if they come with guaranteed rapid closing. Karen's still trying to pull together investors and financing, but frankly, we needed the cash yesterday." "What's her offer?" I asked. $300,000 paid over an 18-month period with a complicated financing structure," Tom replied. his frustration evident. Our CFO is pushing us to liquidate non-core assets immediately to shore up our commercial development downtown. We need liquidity, and we need it fast. I nodded thoughtfully, then made my move. I can offer $350,000 all cash with closing in 7 days. Tom's eyebrows shot up. $350,000 all cash with closing in 7 days. Tom's eyebrows shot up. $350,000? 7 days? He leaned back, considering. That would certainly get my board's attention, he said, clearly surprised by the directness and speed of my offer. But I should warn you, Karen Wellington has friends in the local government. She won't take this lying down. She's a formidable opponent within that community structure. I'm counting on it, I replied with a smile. The wheels were in motion. 2 days later, I had a preliminary agreement in hand, contingent only on a standard environmental assessment that could be completed within the week. To maintain secrecy, the purchasing entity was listed as Thorncroft Holdings, LLC, a company I created specifically for this transaction, unless Karen personally investigated the corporate registration, which, given her resources and paranoia, was a distinct possibility. She wouldn't immediately connect it to me. The clock was ticking. As I built my coalition and investigated my options, Karen apparently caught wind of my activities. Suddenly I began receiving violation notices for issues that had never been mentioned before, issues that had been ignored for years with other residents. Improper weed control, unauthorized landscaping materials that had been there since before I moved in, mailbox height violations, and even a citation for my garage door being the wrong shade of taupe. Despite being painted the exact color approved by the HOA Architectural Committee when I moved in, the fines began piling up. $100 here, $200 there. Within 2 weeks, I'd accumulated nearly $2,000 in violations, and when I tried to contest them, my appeals were mysteriously lost or denied without explanation. It was clear that Karen was using every tool at her disposal to pressure me into conformity, hoping I would simply give up and sell. Then came a particularly troubling incident. Solon had left her bicycle in our driveway while running inside to answer a phone call. Within 15 minutes, a violation notice appeared on our door, complete with photographic evidence of the infraction. Someone had been watching our house, waiting for any minor slip-up to pounce. The systematic nature of the harassment was becoming increasingly obvious, and it wasn't limited to just me. Anyone seen associating with our growing group soon found themselves subject to similar treatment. Maria Gonzalez received a citation for her lawn being a 1/4 inch too high, measured precisely by Karen herself with a ruler. James Morris was fined for a bird feeder that had been in his yard for over a decade, but suddenly violated an obscure aesthetic guideline. Diana Winters received a notice about improper trash disposal because her recycling bin was 6 inches too close to her garage. It was a clear campaign of intimidation, designed to make life so miserable for those who opposed Karen that they would either fall in line or move away. But Karen's heavy-handed tactics were having the opposite effect than she intended. Instead of scaring people away from our coalition, her relentless, often absurd violations were driving more residents to our secret meetings. With each new citation, another neighbor, fed up with the arbitrary enforcement and obvious targeting, joined our secure messaging group. By the 3rd week, we had representatives from nearly 30 households, over a quarter of the community, all ready to stand together. The final straw came when my daughter returned from school in tears. "The kids at school are saying we're troublemakers," she sobbed, burying her face in my chest. "Brianna said her mom told her we're trying to bring down property values and that we don't belong here." Brianna's mother, I discovered, was one of Karen's closest allies on the HOA board, one of the inner circle who benefited from Karen's favors and helped enforce her rules. The battle had now extended to targeting my child. That night after Solon was asleep, I called Merrick. "I'm considering selling the house and moving," I admitted, the words heavy with defeat. "This is affecting Solon too much. I can handle the fines, the harassment, but not this. That's exactly what she wants," Merrick replied firmly, his voice laced with empathy but also resolve. "Karen's done this to at least 6 other families I know of. She hounds them with violations until they're desperate to sell, usually at below market value because of the problems with the property, and then her real estate connections snap them up. Don't give her that satisfaction, Remi. Don't let her win." He was right, of course. Walking away would be letting Karen win, validating her tactics, and worse, it would be teaching Solon the wrong lesson about standing up to bullies. It reinforced my resolve. That same evening, I received the confirmation I'd been waiting for. The environmental assessment on the lake had come back clean, and Meridian's board had accepted my offer. The paperwork was ready to sign. The lake, all 6 acres of it, including the surrounding 10-foot shoreline perimeter, now belonged to me, not the HOA, and certainly not Karen Wellington. Later that night, while reviewing the HOA governing documents again, specifically the section on special assessments, I discovered something crucial that Karen had conveniently omitted: her proposed special assessment to improve lake amenities, which everyone understood was her way of raising funds to purchase the lake, required 75% homeowner approval, not the simple majority she had claimed at the previous lightly attended meeting. She was attempting to bypass the HOA's own rules, confident that no one would challenge her. That was the moment everything crystallized for me. They've brought this fight to my daughter. They've tried to make her feel unwelcome, a pariah in her own neighborhood. Time to show them what happens when you anger someone who spent their career learning how to break down and rebuild systems, I said to myself as I closed my laptop. The next morning, I withdrew $150,000 from my investment accounts. This was approximately 15% more than Karen's offer for the lake property. I called Samuel Washington, who not only encouraged my plan, but, to my surprise, offered to loan me another $50,000 from his personal reserves to ensure we had enough leverage and flexibility for the unforeseen. Within 48 hours, I had signed all the paperwork with Meridian Development. The lake was officially mine. What made the transaction particularly sweet was the timing. The day after I closed the deal, Karen had scheduled a special HOA meeting to announce her grand vision for the future of our lake. She had even hired a local architecture firm known for their lavish designs to create glossy renderings of proposed improvements. Based on a preview I'd seen on the community bulletin board, these improvements included reducing the actual water area by about 20% to make room for a members-only lakeside lounge, a thinly disguised structure that would have conveniently eliminated the main fishing spots and given her and her friends exclusive access. I kept this information absolutely confidential, sharing it only with Merrick and Samuel. Our small core group was the only one that knew the truth. Meanwhile, Karen was becoming increasingly aggressive in her campaign to secure the lake and silence dissent. She held an emergency HOA meeting to announce a special assessment for critical community improvements, $50 per month additional fees from each household, supposedly for lake maintenance and upgrades, but actually to build her war chest for the purchase she was still finalizing with Meridian. At the meeting, Karen stood at the podium, impeccably dressed, with a slick PowerPoint presentation titled Elevating Lakeside Estates, a Premier Vision. She spent 20 minutes outlining how the strategic reimagining of the lake area would enhance property values and community prestige. What she didn't mention, of course, was that her real estate company would be handling the development and sales of the new, highly lucrative lakefront properties she planned to build on the land she was trying to buy from Meridian. Karen also launched a thinly veiled smear campaign against me during the meeting. Without naming me directly, she spoke about certain new elements in our community who don't understand our values and financially unstable individuals trying to undermine property values. Samuel, always the gentleman but with a core of steel, bravely stood up to defend me, asking for specific examples of undermining behavior, only to have Karen publicly humiliate him by bringing up a long-resolved tax issue from his past. "I find it interesting," Karen said with mock sweetness, her eyes hard, "that Mr. Washington feels qualified to lecture us about community standards when he himself had to negotiate with the IRS over unpaid taxes just a few years ago. Perhaps we should focus on getting our own houses in order before criticizing others." It was a low blow, designed to silence him and sow doubt about his character. Samuel had indeed faced an audit years ago, but it was due to a clerical error that had been fully resolved with no penalties. The way Karen framed it, however, made it sound like he was a tax cheat. The meeting devolved further when Sapphira Duskland, a timid resident who owned a small flower shop in town, tentatively suggested that perhaps a community vote should be taken before changing lake regulations so drastically. Karen fixed her with an icy stare. "Sapphira," she purred, her voice dangerously low, "I believe the flower shop lease renewal is coming up soon, isn't it? It would be a shame if there were any complications with that, wouldn't it?" The threat was barely concealed. A chilling display of how Karen used her influence, even outside the HOA, to control people. Sapphira immediately backed down, her face pale, as I watched this public display of intimidation, of her wielding her power with such casual cruelty. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Karen had no idea that her grand plans had already been derailed, that the very centerpiece of her premier vision no longer belonged to Meridian and would never belong to her. The satisfaction of knowing what was coming, of the reckoning that was about to unfold, almost made up for the months of harassment, the fines and the pain she had caused my daughter. Meanwhile, Karen had used her connection with Mayor James Wilson to create administrative pressure on me. Mayor Wilson, a man known more for attending ribbon-cutting ceremonies and avoiding controversy than for strong leadership, was clearly in Karen's pocket. Suddenly, my home was subject to random safety inspections, and questions were raised about building permits for renovations the previous owner had completed years ago. The mayor himself didn't dirty his hands directly, but his building inspector, a cousin of Karen's by marriage, was suddenly very interested in the structural integrity of my deck. The pressure was working when Solon came home crying for the third time in 2 weeks because classmates were excluding her based on rumors about our family. Rumors undoubtedly started by Karen's allies. I nearly gave in. The thought of packing up and leaving, of finding a quiet place where we could be free from this toxic environment, was incredibly tempting. But then I received the phone call I'd been waiting for. Meridian's lawyer confirmed that Karen had just been informed that the lake property had been sold to an anonymous third-party investor, and that all negotiations with her were terminated. The carefully laid trap was sprung. Within hours, Karen was on my doorstep, her carefully maintained composure visibly cracking. Her face was red, her eyes narrowed into slits. "What did you do?" she demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "I know you've been talking to Meridian. Did you sabotage my deal?" I smiled pleasantly, a calm, controlled smile that I'd perfected during years of high-stakes negotiations. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Karen. Though I did hear the lake property was sold. Quite a surprise, wasn't it? I hope the HOA has a good relationship with the new owner." Her eyes narrowed further. "This isn't over. The HOA has a binding recreational use agreement. Whoever bought that lake can't change access without our approval." "I think you should check the terms of that agreement, Karen," I replied calmly, my voice still soft, but with an edge of steel. "From what I understand, it expires in less than 30 days, and renewal is at the sole discretion of the property owner. And from what I hear, the new owner might not be inclined to renew, given the recent misunderstandings regarding community regulations." Karen's face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly, her desperation making her reckless. "The community won't stand for this. We'll sue for right of access. We'll file injunctions. We'll tie you up in court for years." "Good luck with that, Karen," I replied, still smiling, enjoying the moment of her realization. "But I'm sure you'll respect private property rights, won't you? After all, you've always been such a stickler for following the rules." With that, I closed the door, leaving her standing on my porch, fuming. The next 24 hours were fascinating to observe. Karen called an emergency HOA board meeting, conveniently closed to the general community. Through our network, we learned she was frantically trying to identify the new owner and develop strategies to maintain control of the lake. She even enlisted Mayor Wilson to look into possible zoning restrictions or eminent domain claims, all of which Merrick assured me were legally baseless given the property's history and private designation. The whispers and rumors throughout the neighborhood were a whirlwind of speculation. Over the next week, Karen grew increasingly desperate. She convened an emergency legal committee meeting, claiming the HOA would fight to maintain their rights to the lake through legal action. The mayor began making noise about zoning regulations and public access requirements, though, as Merrick confirmed, none of these had any legal standing given the property's clear private status. Meanwhile, I quietly met with a water quality expert and a local conservation organization to assess the lake's ecological health. What they found was concerning. Years of unregulated landscaping chemicals from surrounding properties had created abnormal algae growth, and the fish population was showing signs of stress. The HOA had been completely neglecting the actual environmental health of the lake while using environmental concerns as an excuse to restrict activities like fishing. I also consulted with a security expert about installing cameras and creating a proper management plan for the property. Everything was being prepared for the moment when I would reveal myself as the new owner to the entire community. The turning point came when Karen, in her desperation, decided to make a bold statement of ownership. She organized a massive lakeside party for all original homeowners, conspicuously excluding the newer residents, like me, to assert our community rights to our lake. The event was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, complete with catered food, music, and prominently displayed wine bars at each end of the lake, a blatant violation of the very rules she enforced against others at her convenience. What Karen didn't know was that I had already filed the necessary paperwork to terminate the recreational use agreement early, citing multiple violations of the maintenance terms, specifically the neglect of water quality. My attorney had confirmed that the HOA's neglect of water quality standards provided ample grounds for immediate termination, though the agreement would have expired in less than a month anyway. I decided this was the perfect moment for the big reveal, as Karen's party reached full swing, with about 60 residents drinking and socializing around the lake, basking in the afternoon sun and enjoying the view they believed was their inalienable right. I arrived. I wasn't alone. With me were Merrick, Samuel, my real estate attorney, and crucially, a local police officer I'd discreetly briefed on the situation, ensuring everything was above board and legal. Walking calmly into the center of the gathering, I made my way to the small stage area where Karen had been making announcements. I picked up the microphone she had been using. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said, my voice amplified across the lake. "I hope you're enjoying this beautiful day at the lake." Karen immediately rushed over, her face a mask of fury, attempting to snatch the microphone. "This is a private community event. You weren't invited." I held on to the microphone firmly, my grip surprisingly strong. "Actually, Karen, I think there's been some confusion about who should be inviting whom." I nodded to my attorney, who handed me a document, the deed to the lake. "As the legal owner of this lake and all surrounding property within 10 feet of the shoreline," I announced, my voice clear and steady, "I'm informing you that you are all currently trespassing on private property." The crowd fell silent, the murmuring stopping abruptly. Karen's face flushed a deep, alarming red. "What are you talking about? This is HOA property." "No, Karen," I replied, my voice softening slightly, a hint of amusement in my tone. "It never was. It belonged to Meridian Development until 3 days ago, when I purchased it outright." I held up the deed for everyone to see, a plain piece of paper that held immense power in this moment, and effective immediately. I'm terminating the recreational use agreement that's set to expire in 28 days anyway, citing multiple violations of the maintenance clause. I gestured to the police officer standing calmly beside my attorney. I've asked Officer Reynolds here to help ensure an orderly departure from my property. You have 15 minutes to gather your belongings and leave the premises." Karen's face was a study in shock, like someone had just thrown a bucket of ice water over her carefully coiffed hair. You can't do this. The community has rights." "Actually, I can, and I have," I replied calmly, the power of the moment sinking in. "And Officer Reynolds has a trespassing complaint ready to file if necessary, but I'm sure it won't come to that. After all, Karen, you've always been such a stickler for following the rules." As the crowd began murmuring in confusion and disbelief, I continued, wanting to make the message crystal clear. For those wondering, this is what happens when you allow someone to abuse power unchecked for years. Consider this a lesson in consequences. The party dispersed quickly, the celebratory atmosphere evaporating instantly, replaced by awkward silence and confused whispers. Many guests shot accusing looks at Karen as they left, realizing they had been used as props in her elaborate, now-failed scheme. Several people approached me privately, expressing a mix of shock, confusion, and, surprisingly, respect. About time someone stood up to her. One longtime resident whispered as he passed, shaking my hand discreetly. "This has been a long time coming. Within the week, I had private property, no trespassing signs installed around the lake perimeter, and hired a reputable security company to patrol the area 24 hours a day. I also organized a small press conference with the local newspaper to announce my plans to convert the lake into a natural fish conservation area and educational space for children to learn about the local ecosystem. The lake has been environmentally neglected for years," I explained to the reporters, presenting the water quality test results. "Our tests show concerning levels of phosphates and nitrates from lawn chemicals used by some residents. My team of environmental experts will be implementing a restoration plan to return this beautiful resource to a healthy, thriving state for the benefit of the entire local area, not just the immediate residents." The community reaction was mixed at first, but increasingly favorable as details of Karen's planned development leaked out. Many residents who had initially been upset about losing lake access became supportive when they learned about her intention to reduce the water area and build private luxury homes on part of the shoreline, a project that would have diminished the shared resource for her personal gain. The revelation that she had been planning to profit personally and exclusively from community property shifted public opinion dramatically. Karen was livid. She attempted to sue me for destruction of community value and malicious interference, but her case was dismissed almost immediately when my attorney presented the clear property deed and the expired access agreement. She then tried to rally the HOA to implement punitive measures against me. Additional fines, restrictions, even attempting to force a lien on my property based on the accumulated, fabricated violations. But many residents were beginning to question whose interests she really represented. The tide was turning. The tide truly turned when Sapphira Duskland, inspired by the turn of events and emboldened by the community's growing discontent, finally found the courage to speak up at a tense HOA meeting. "I've been on this board for 3 years, she said, her voice shaking at first, but growing stronger with each word. "And I've watched Karen manipulate regulations target specific homeowners she didn't like, and divert OA funds to pet projects that primarily benefit her friends' properties. Last year we spent $80,000 to renovate the North Side Park that only serves about 10 homes, all owned by Karen's friends, while rejecting basic playground equipment for the main park, used by dozens of families and their children. Sapphira's stand, coming from someone previously so timid, inspired others. At the next HOA meeting, several longtime residents spoke up about various abuses they had witnessed but had been afraid to mention. Arbitrary fines, favoritism in enforcement, shady dealings with contractors connected to Karen's business. The floodgates had opened, and years of pent-up frustration with Karen's autocratic leadership poured out. A motion was proposed to audit all HOA finances for the past 5 years, a motion that passed by a surprising margin as more board members began to question Karen's leadership. As financial records were scrutinized, irregularities and evidence of self-dealing began to emerge. The community was fracturing, but not along the lines Karen had expected. Instead of uniting against me, many residents were beginning to see the HOA leadership, and Karen specifically, as the real problem. As more residents began to question Karen's leadership and distance themselves from her toxic influence, I announced a special program for the community. Free fishing passes for all children living in lakeside estates, to be used at Rachel's Lake, a name I had quietly registered. There was just one exception. Children of current HOA leadership would not be eligible until their parents resigned from the board. It was a pointed move, perhaps petty, but incredibly effective. The most satisfying moment came when several residents who had previously sneered at me alongside Karen started showing up at my door, looking sheepish, asking if their children could possibly be granted fishing passes. Some even began openly criticizing Karen, the same people who had been her staunch supporters just weeks earlier. The social dynamics had completely reversed. "My son really wants to learn to fish," admitted Veronica Palmer, who had vocally supported Karen at numerous HOA meetings, including the disastrous lake party. She stood on my doorstep, her discomfort palpable. The same woman who had deliberately turned away when I greeted her at the community pool just weeks earlier. "He says your daughter mentioned a junior conservation program." "Yes, we're starting an educational program for kids," I confirmed, leaning against the doorframe. "It focuses on ecology, conservation, and sustainable fishing practices. Solon is helping to organize it. It's a great way for kids to connect with nature and each other." I paused deliberately, letting the implication hang in the air. "Of course, it's only open to families who aren't currently represented on the HOA board." Veronica's expression was a fascinating mixture of frustration, calculation, and dawning understanding. "I've been reconsidering my position on the board lately," she said, her voice slightly strained. "The recent decisions and the way things have been handled, they seem quite concerning." "How interesting," I replied neutrally, maintaining eye contact. "Well, if your situation changes, please let me know. The program starts next Saturday." Within 3 days, Veronica had publicly resigned from the HOA board, citing personal reasons and a desire to spend more time with family. 2 other board members, sensing the shift in power and the direction of the community's anger, followed suit within the week. Karen grew desperate, her power base crumbling. She spread rumors that the lake was polluted and dangerous, attempting to scare residents and devalue the property. Claims I quickly debunked by publishing professional water quality test results, showing it was actually cleaner and healthier than when under HOA management. Thanks to my environmental team's initial efforts, then she made her most desperate and foolish move yet, attempting to bribe Merrick Henderson. She offered to clear all his past, baseless HOA violations, and even offered him a position on a new, restructured board once she had resolved the lake situation. What she didn't know was that Merrick, anticipating such a move, recorded the entire conversation. "I can make all those violation notices disappear, Merrick," Karen's voice said clearly on the recording, played for me with a satisfied smile by the retired attorney. "And there would be a place for you on the restructured board, with a stipend, of course. All you need to do is help convince Thorncraft to sell the lake to the HOA. Tell him about the environmental liabilities, the insurance costs, scare him a little, make him an offer he can't refuse." Merrick clicked off the recording. "I think our friend Karen has forgotten the first rule of being a villain," he said with a chuckle. "Never try to corrupt a retired ethics attorney." The final act of Karen's reign came late one night, when my newly installed security cameras captured her and two other remaining loyal HOA board members trespassing on my property near the lake's edge. They were apparently attempting to collect water samples, or more likely, contaminate the water with something to support her pollution claims. The footage clearly showed Karen pouring something from a small bottle into the lake near where children often fished. I immediately sent the video, time-stamped and high-resolution, to the local police department. Karen Wellington was charged with criminal trespassing and attempted environmental contamination. As she was being processed at the local police station, investigators, now alerted to the pervasive discontent and rumors of malfeasance within the HOA, began looking more closely at HOA finances during her tenure. What they found led to additional investigations into misappropriation of funds, selective enforcement of regulations based on personal relationships and biases, and clear evidence that she had been using her position to drive down certain property values before her real estate connections purchased them at a discount. 2 weeks later, I invited all community residents, except the remaining current HOA leadership, to a meeting at my home to discuss the future of the lake. The turnout was extraordinary, with nearly every household represented. People were curious, angry, and ready for change. I laid out my proposal, not just for the lake, but for the community's governance. I would transfer ownership of the lake to a newly established community trust, owned collectively by the residents, with 3 legally binding conditions. First, the HOA leadership would need to be completely restructured, with strict term limits and transparent voting procedures for all board decisions. Second, all existing HOA regulations would be reviewed and amended to ensure fair and equal application to all residents, eliminating the arbitrary and discriminatory rules. Third, an independent ethics committee with rotating community membership would be established to oversee HOA decisions and provide a mechanism for residents to report abuses without fear of retaliation. Then I revealed my final move, one that even Merrick and Samuel hadn't known about until that moment. Many of you may not be aware, I explained to the stunned gathering, my voice resonating with purpose, but during the past month, using my background in finance and some discreet connections. I've also been quietly purchasing the mortgage notes on several properties in this community from Lakeside National Bank. I paused to let this sink in. The murmurs in the room grew louder, including Karen Wellington's home. The room erupted in shocked gasps and excited murmurs. Using my financial connections and Samuel's invaluable banking relationships, I had indeed purchased the debt obligations on nearly 20% of the community's homes, focusing particularly on properties owned by Karen and her closest, most vocal allies. It was a perfectly legal, if unconventional, tactic, and it gave me significant leverage in the community's future. I have no intention of foreclosing on anyone or calling in these debts, I assured the concerned, wide-eyed faces before me. In fact, I'm prepared to offer refinancing at below-market rates and flexible terms to every homeowner whose note I now hold. But first, we need to fix the broken system that's been dividing this community for years and holding us all hostage to one person's agenda. The vote to replace the entire HOA leadership was nearly unanimous. The remaining board members, facing the combined weight of community outrage, impending audits, and the potential exposure of their own complicity, resigned on the spot. Karen Wellington was forced to resign in disgrace, facing not only the criminal charges for trespassing and attempted contamination, but also multiple civil lawsuits from homeowners who had been unfairly targeted and financially harmed by her discriminatory policies. Her real estate company came under intense investigation for unethical practices, and within months, she had put her house on the market, finding no takers due to her now toxic reputation. No one wanted to buy a house from the woman who had terrorized the neighborhood. Sapphira Duskland, her voice now strong and clear, was elected as the new HOA president, promising comprehensive reforms and unprecedented transparency. The lake was officially renamed Rachel's Lake, in honor of my late wife, and I transferred ownership to the newly established community trust with legally binding conditions, ensuring it would remain accessible to all residents for passive recreation, like fishing, in perpetuity, protected from future development or manipulation. 3 months after the whole ordeal began, Solon and I hosted a community fishing day at Rachel's Lake. Nearly every family in the neighborhood attended, children laughing and learning to fish together, parents chatting amicably across social circles that had previously been rigidly separated by Karen's divisive influence. As Solon and I sat on the dock that evening after everyone had gone home, watching the sunset reflect on the calm water, she smiled, a real, full smile that reached her eyes and lit up her face. "Mom would be really proud of you, Dad," she said softly, leaning against my shoulder. Looking out over the peaceful lake, where families had gathered in harmony for the first time in years, I thought about how justice sometimes comes not from winning a battle of force, but from rebuilding what was broken. "I think she'd be proud of both of us, kiddo," I replied. 1 year later, our community had become a model for HOA reform, with several neighboring developments adopting our governance structure and ethics guidelines. Karen Wellington had moved away, reportedly losing most of her assets in the lawsuits and investigations. I was approached about running for mayor after James Wilson decided not to seek re-election following revelations about his questionable relationship with Karen, but I declined. Instead, I established a scholarship fund in Rachel's name, for children who had lost a parent to cancer. Sometimes the best way to defeat a bully isn't to become a bigger bully yourself. It's to change the rules of the game entirely. And if you're watching this video while dealing with your own HOA nightmare, remember, never underestimate the power of someone who understands the rules, has the patience to wait for the perfect moment, and isn't afraid to use their unique skills to fight for what's right, especially when they have a few $1 million and a very personal reason to win. Lovers end of file. NF dig vec transcript extune.